家好，大家下午好，我是今天的说书人，我叫玉婷，欢迎大家收看我们吃播的节目，用肚子翻滚素的新加坡。今天呢，我要介绍的这本书就是这本《Eating Animals》。那因为这是一本英文的书，所以我接下来的分享将会用英文来做这分享。So, hello everybody and good afternoon. Today we are in Hougang Green and in this restaurant called Green by Choice. So I'll be introducing this book in green cover called Eating Animals. And if you notice, I'm also in a plain green dress to match the location, Hougang Green, the restaurant, Green by Choice, and this green book, Eating Animals. So today we're having a green theme. So without further ado, let us delve into today's topic. So, today my sharing will be centered on 4 main areas. Number 1, why this book? 2, a brief overview. 3, key findings of this book. And 4, my main takeaways. So, why this book? Now, if you look at this book, the cover itself, for lack of a better term, it looks rather plain and inoffensive and the kind of book that would just blend into the background without you noticing it. But if you do notice it, there's something about the understatedness of this book that makes you just want to pick it up and read it. And once you flip open the pages, you just know that there are going to be important messages inside this book that you will never ever forget. You'll just remember it for life, and this is the case for me. So, the saying goes, do not judge a book by its cover, and I think it's totally true for this book, okay? Without any graphic, plain green text, but it is just such a good read. Okay, now Eating Animals. Most people will probably think that this book is trying to promote vegetarianism or convert someone to become a vegan or vegetarian, but it is not. In fact, the author approaches this topic from a very neutral point of view, asking questions, stating facts, and then later letting the consumer decide for himself or herself what putting meat on your plate really means. Okay, so it's not trying to promote vegetarianism in any ways, but just letting you know what it really entails when you put meat on your plate. And the author, Jonathan Safran Foer, he shares about his inspiration to write this book, and it is because of his newborn son. He wanted to decide whether or not he should let his son eat meat. So on a personal level, I can find this hugely relatable because my children are currently on a vegetarian diet too. Yeah, and last but not least, as a vegetarian, and I'm sure my fellow vegetarian friends can concur, we often get asked this question a lot. And the question is, what are your reasons for becoming a vegetarian? So, why are you a vegetarian? Is it because of health reasons, environmental reasons, or compassion for the animals, or all of the above? So with that in mind, I'll proceed to answer this question later, and with that in mind, let us now continue with today's sharing. Okay, so let's start with the brief overview. This book is so popular that it has been made into a documentary. Okay, and Hollywood celebrity Natalie Portman also shared that she became a vegan in 2009 after reading this book, Eating Animals. So, she is a producer and a narrator for this documentary, Eating Animals. So, let us now look at a 1-minute short clip of this documentary of Eating Animals.
You come across these steel masterpieces, all brought together in the most ingenious ways to produce more and more.
Is this farming? I say no.
This is breeding 50 years ago. I spent days and months taking care of those birds in the pasture.
The basics that I'm using today is passed from one generation to the next. It's a way of life rather than going to a factory producing protein units.
There's no way you can love an animal that has been genetically engineered to die in 6 weeks.
There's inherent cruelty in that system. if I started documenting things I saw or things I heard about, it was time to pull the trigger.
It's against federal law to have cameras?
You can't shut down the individual's right to know about what this industry is doing. There's got to be a stop.
There's no future.
Okay, I think we can stop here for now. Okay, so I think the question that we really need to ask ourselves is, what does it really mean when we put meat on the plate? What does chicken, pork, beef, and even fish really mean, and where do they come from? Now these days, we want our food faster, bigger, and cheaper. Faster, bigger, and cheaper sounds too good to be true, right? Surely there must be a cost. So what is the cost? So these days, let us first take a look at the chicken. Our chickens have been genetically modified into two main breeds: broilers for their meat and layers for their hens. The chickens these days are bigger, faster, and cheaper. So what's the catch? Let's take a look at the life of a broiler. If you can see the picture on the left, this is what our broilers look like today. I don't know about you, but this looks like Frankenstein chicken to me. Like, it's too fat, too fast. Now imagine you, as a human, imagine you suddenly weigh like 120 kg. Your legs will be so weak from supporting your heavy body that you will not be able to stand up at all. And this is exactly what is happening to the chicken. Most of the chickens suffer from leg deformities, that they just lie down, unable to move, and lie down in their own species. And this is just the legs. What about the heart and the lungs? Now your heart will be so stressed that you'll most likely suffer a heart attack. And this is exactly what is happening to the chicken as well. Most of them suffer from heart attacks that they die a sudden death. So they do not even make it past 6 weeks, which is the age for slaughter. So what happens to those who made it past 6 weeks, like, okay, fit for slaughter? What happens to those broilers? Let's take a look. Now, most of the broilers, chickens, are then hung onto the conveyor belt while fully conscious and alive. So most of them are actually slaughtered alive. Now you would think after the slaughter, it all ends there and the rest is just processing, right? But no, that's not the case. After that, they are being sliced and disembodied and then soaked in cold water to absorb more weight. What does more weight mean? More weight means they can sell for more money. So imagine chicken soup. Chicken dipped in water sounds like chicken soup, right? Except this soup is called feces soup, because this soup is actually dead chicken, which contains lots of feces and pathogens, which is bacteria from individual birds. And then all these chickens will then be shipped to the wet markets and supermarket for the average consumer to consume. So this is what happens when you buy the chicken. Now we've covered the life and death of a broiler chicken. Now let us look at layer chickens, which are chickens for eggs. Now this is the life of a layer. At birth, the baby chicks are checked to decide if they are male or female. Okay, and male chicks are usually rendered as useless because obviously they do not give eggs. So what are the fate of these male chicks? They are usually killed within hours of their birth, either by electrocuting, buried to death, or sent to a chipper and chipped alive. And what about the female chicks? So the female chicks will then go through this process called debeaking to remove a part of their beak so that they do not chip onto the cages. And then when they grow bigger into hens, they are then stacked in battery cages. What do battery cages mean? These battery cages are usually 3 to 9 tiers high of cages, and in Japan they can even stack up to 18 tiers high. And how much space do they have? They only have like 67 square inch of space. What does 67 square inch really mean? It is somewhere between the size of this book and an A4 piece of paper. So in short, smaller than an A4 piece of paper. So this is how much space a chicken has its whole life. Now what does that mean again in human context? I always like to imagine in human context so that we really understand, or at least try to understand what it means. Imagine you are stuck in a crowded elevator for days. Just imagine, the elevator door just doesn't open for days. There's no respite, no relief, and no repairman is coming. You cannot turn around without hitting your neighbors. So, what happens after a few days? Some people in the elevator probably go crazy, some probably become cannibalistic, but yet there is no relief and no repairman is coming. The only time the elevator will open its door is at the end of your life for a process called processing. And now, you have just heard the life of a layer chicken. So, this is the life and death of a layer chicken. And now, let's move on to pig farming. So, we will think that pigs are actually one of the most misunderstood creatures on earth. They are actually very intelligent and super cute. But pigs suffer cruelty that nobody can ever imagine. So let me tell you why. For pigs, most of them are artificially inseminated, which means they're artificially pregnant to give birth most of their lives. So once a pig is pregnant, the farmer will push it to go inside a gestational crate, which is like a very small space, and it will spend the next 16 weeks of its pregnancy inside this small little confined space. Most of the pregnant pigs do not want to go in there because it's just crazy to spend 16 weeks of your life while pregnant, trapped in a very small space that you're totally unable to move. So the workers will usually beat the pigs violently just to make them to move inside the space. Okay, so assuming that objective is achieved and the pig eventually do move inside the space, most of the mother pigs will then go crazy because they are just suffering inside that small little space. And what about the babies? What about the piglets? Most of the piglets born this way have deformities. Deformities such as split legs and all kinds of weird illnesses. The figure is about 10 to 40% of these piglets are born with deformities. So we ask ourselves, what happens when these piglets are born with deformities, right? So the worker will usually render these pigs as useless because they are unable, highly unlikely to grow to full weight by the time they are of slaughter age. So to prevent them from taking up space in the factory, what do these workers do? You probably guessed it, they kill them immediately. And how do they kill them? They kill them by taking the little pigs and smashing them headfirst onto concrete walls. Yes, it's cruelty to its max. And this process is called thumping. So they hold the little pigs by its hind legs and then smash it headfirst against the concrete wall and let it die an instant death. So one of the workers actually shared that how many piglets do they kill this way in a day? It can be as many as up to 100 or 120 per day, okay? So this is just how cruel and crazy pig farming is. So now that we have touched on the cruelty of pig farming, let us talk about the environmental impact of having a pig farm, right? So case in point, we'll take the example of Smithfield. Smithfield is a big corporation which is one of America's leading pork producer. In 2009, when this book was written, Smithfield kills a figure of about 31 million pigs annually. Now pigs, they produce about 2 to 4 times as much feces as a human. So if you do your maths, that's about 281 pounds of shit, okay, of feces. Now you would think, for lack of a better term, you think shit is just shit, right? But it is not, okay? It's not just literally shit. So this so-called shit of feces comprises of stillborn piglets, after birth, dead pigs, vomit, blood, urine, hair, pus, body parts, glass bottles, and more. So it is all kinds of contaminated waste. And what's going to happen to this contaminated waste? They seep into our rivers, lakes, and oceans, polluting the water, air, and soil. Now, for a company like Smithfield, they usually have to deal with lawsuits and legal battles related to pollution. But to them, it is a cost-benefit analysis. They eventually decide that paying fines is a cheaper way to deal with this problem than doing the right thing. As of 2020, last year, their revenue is somewhat in the range of more than 20 billions. So, given such a huge revenue size, they probably decide that they can afford to pay some fines rather than do the right thing. And so, back to the question, what happens to this massively dangerous amount of species? If they eventually have to do something about it, what do they do with it? They built this thing called a hog lagoon. In the trailer earlier, we actually saw an image like this. Initially, I didn't know what it was until I read the book. Okay, so if all goes according to plan, this liquefied waste is then pumped into this lagoon, which are usually beside the pig's shed. And how big is this lagoon? Okay, just to give an idea, it is as much as 120,000 square feet and 30 feet deep. So, what does this mean? It means that if you accidentally fall into the lagoon, you would die. Yeah, it is that bad. So an insider by the name of Tias, he tells a haunting story of a worker in Michigan. So this worker in Michigan is repairing. Yeah, thank you. So this worker in Michigan is repairing one of this lagoon, and he was overcome by the stench. I mean, okay, you can probably imagine how overpowering the stench is. And he was overcome by the stench and he fell into the lagoon. So his nephew wanted to save him. His nephew jumped in to save him, but he was overcome. And then his cousin wanted to save the nephew, and he was overcome too. And then the worker's elder brother jumped in to save the nephew and the cousin. But he too was drowned. And the worker's father jumped in to save the brother, but he too died. So in the end, all 5 of them died in the hog lagoon. So you can imagine the red color that we see from this hog lagoon. It probably comprises not just of pigs, but of human corpses as well. Yeah, so the environmental impact of having a pig farm, the massively dangerous feces. So now that we have covered chickens and pigs, let us now take a look at cattle. Cattle's farming, cows. Now if you take a look at the picture on the left, you would probably think that, cows lead a generally happier life, right? Like at least they do not have to spend their lives confined in factory farms and they get to enjoy the sun and run around in the wild. Yes, this is true to a certain extent. And we take the case of Neiman Ranch. So in the trailer, if you recall, this guy, his name is Bill Neiman. He actually runs a cattle ranch, and so he's a cattle rancher, and not only that, he's actually a vegetarian rancher, which means he runs a cattle ranch and he himself is also vegetarian. So he finds that as a rancher, as a cattle rancher, he has this responsibility, this obligation to give animals the freedom and make sure that his animals don't suffer and they get to experience the basic pleasures of life, such as lying in the sun, mating, and rearing their young. So he wants to give them a good life and an easy death, okay? But at the end of the day, all cattle come to the same fate. That is, they are brought to the kill floor, which is the slaughterhouse. And this is an inevitable and unavoidable fate of all cattle. So assuming they have had a good life, now what happens at the end of this life? So this is cattle slaughter. When I first saw this picture, to be honest, I was filled with disgust and horror and shock. Not only because this picture is so filled with so much blood, but because there's just something inherently wrong with it. And let me tell you why. So cattle, they are typically slaughtered at the age of 12 to 14 months of age, okay, when they are adolescents. So in a typical process, the workers will lead the cattle into this road, and then they will use a knocker to knock the cattle unconscious or causing it death. By right, you would think that that is at least a more humane way to kill the cattle, while it is unconscious or straight away dying with one knock or one blow. Except it is not. In most farms, this is the thing. The workers do not want the cattle to bleed too much, because too much blood in the body of the animals will lead to bacterial growth and reduces shelf life, hence rendering the animal as not fresh. So what do they want to do, and what does this mean? It means they want the animal to bleed to death slowly, a slow and painful bloody death. So this means that they would actually, the animals are actually black skinned, and this and both while fully conscious. Some of the workers working in this slaughterhouse, they themselves have voiced out to the authorities, telling the truth about what's going on in this slaughterhouse. And they said that these cattle, while fully conscious, their heads are just looking around frantically. They're frightened, they're scared, and they're just fighting for their lives. So can you imagine all this while they're while being skinned black, fully conscious? And they're just so frightened. They're trying to fight for their lives, but they can't. And but eventually when they breathe their last breath, so they're completely skinned, and their body cut into half. So this is looking like the what you see in restaurants, the typical stereotype image of beef hanging in freezers, except now it is with eerie stillness. So this is why when I first saw this picture, it was mind-blowing, but at the same time it just I couldn't take a second look at it initially. Yeah. No, so actually because of my religion, I'm born into a Buddhist family, and Buddhists don't take beef, so I don't take beef. Yeah. But now that we learned about the cruel way of slaughtering cattle, I hope that the next time when somebody decides to take beef, please do it with more consideration, knowing what it really means when you put that piece of beef into your mouth. Alright, so now that we have covered land animals, chickens, pigs, and cattle, let us now take a look at the ocean. So we rarely think of land animals and sea animals in the same way, but actually aquaculture, which is the rearing of sea animals, is essentially underwater factory farming. Now I'm sure like salmon is a very popular seafood, and like most people who eat fish will eat salmon. But salmon, and I'm sure most of you will know this, that salmon are actually farmed these days. So there are not that many wild-caught salmon left anymore, and most of the salmon that are in the market today are actually farmed salmons. But salmons undergo a fate that is equally terrible. So let me tell you, there's 6 sources of sufferings for a salmon. Okay, number 1, they live in foul water that makes it so hard for them to breathe. 2, because of the intense crowding, there is a lot of cannibalism going on in the water. And 3, intensive handling by the workers causes a lot of stress in the fish. 4, there's an abundance of sea lice, as you can see from this picture, and the sea lice are just eating away at the salmon's face. 5, nutritional deficiencies, which lead to weakened immune system in the salmon. And 6, last but not least, there's no stable social hierarchy, so it leads to more cannibalization among the salmon. So the next time you pick up a piece of salmon, know that this is what your salmon has to go through in order to reach your plate. And as we mentioned earlier, aquaculture is not necessarily any better because it is essentially underwater factory farming. So you would think that if farmed salmon is bad, then probably wild-caught salmon or wild-caught seafood is better or a more humane way of eating fish, right? So this is actually trawling and long-line fishing. Let me just give you an idea of what this means. So for example, to catch a specific type of fish, let's say tuna for instance, 145 other species or more than that actually have to be killed along with that target species. So, and these are known as bycatch. And this so-called bycatch, they are not small in numbers. In fact, they are massively huge. So what do these bycatch include? They include sharks, whales, dolphins, turtles, just to name a few, and up to 145 other species. And what kind of numbers are we looking at? The ballpark range. We are looking at like more than 100 million sharks, more than 300,000 whales and dolphins, and more than 250,000 turtles in a year. So this bycatch, the numbers are just mind-blowingly huge. And then we ask ourselves, so what happens to this bycatch? I mean, they are like byproducts. They are not our target species or target products. So what happens to this bycatch? Okay, so for example, for sharks, I'm sure most of you would probably know this by now. When the fisherman catches a shark, it will then cut off its fins, for shark's fin, and then throw the sharks back into the ocean to let it bleed to death slowly. And then for other species like dolphins, which we do not eat, they are just left to die on its own. So these are the fate of the bycatch. And it is not necessarily more humane as one might misunderstand. Because most of these animals also die a long and slow and painful death. So this is wildlife fishing or long line fishing for you. So now that we have covered both the land and the sea animals, we have pretty much rounded up the book content. And let me now take you on what are my main takeaways after reading this book. So I feel that reading this book, this is an urgent and eye-opening look at the 3 consequences of factory farming. Number 1, it is a real threat to our health. Now imagine the use of antibiotics and hormones. Just think of our Frankenstein chicken again. Like just how much antibiotics and growth hormones have to be pumped inside that chicken to let it reach that size by slaughter age. And when you eat that chicken, you're just eating these chemicals into your body, and this is a real threat to our human health. 2, it destroys the entire global system. Again, the example of pig farmings and the environmental impacts. So much air, water, and soil pollution. And people living near these pig farms, they have actually said that because they breathe in the toxics of the pig feces, they complain of having chronic sufferings such as headaches, nosebleeds, earaches, and burning lungs. And children who live near these pig farms are also twice as likely to develop asthma, and more than 50% of them are actually suffering from asthma. So this is again a real threat to human health. And 3, last but not least, it causes unjustifiable suffering to the animals, because we're just exploiting the animals due to our own desire for meat. And as we have mentioned time and again, be it your chicken, your pig, your cow, or your fish, all of them go through unimaginable amount of suffering to reach your plate. So this is animals suffering. Now, food is a main part of our lives, right? I mean, food matters, and animal matters, and eating animals matters even more. But at the end of the day, it is the ideal of what it means, as we call being human. When we eat animals, do we question this ideal of being human? Let us continue to ask ourselves these questions and never stop asking. So, last but not least, similar to the author, I really and truly believe that if slaughterhouses were open for excursions or public visit. If we were to take 100 people to the slaughterhouse and take a poll from there, 95 of them would probably say, I'm never gonna eat this again. So with that, I conclude my sharing for today, and thank you very much for watching and listening. Thank you. Okay, so we're in this place called Green by Choice, and this is my first time in this place, and this is the food that we have ordered today, our food and drinks. And if you can take a look at the background, this is a very beautiful poster. 那因为这是中文的，所以我这里就换回中文来做一个介绍，好不好？就其实它这里是写素食健康，然后对让我们一起同行，然后我们不吃肉，所以希望在和大家分享这本书过后，《吃动物》这本书《Eating Animals》，我们都可以一起来响应，就是少肉多素。然后其实呢，这里的环境非常的优美，然后它也是给人一种很绿化、很自然的感觉。然后其实它的食物的价格也非常的划算。然后因为它就在附近的邻里，然后附近都是住宅区，所以又有巴士站、地铁站也在不远的地方，所以很方便让大家可以来到这样子的一个地方，享用美味、可口，然后价格又廉宜的一个素食。所以现在如果开放了，可以5个人以上一起来用餐，也希望大家可以邀约你的家人朋友，就一起来到这里来享用一餐非常美味又好吃、健康的素食。那我们接下来就来到这里，这就是它的门口，然后大家可以看一下就给人一种非常绿化、非常自在的感觉所以欢迎大家，这里就是Green， 然后Green by Choice 0102，所以希望大家可以多多来支持 Green by Choice。好，sorry， 好，那希望大家从今天开始记得要响应多素少荤，然后最好就是我们可以一起来响应茹素。那我今天的分享就到这里，然后我们下次再会，拜拜。